John Herbert did has made an impact in each and every person that is sitting here. And as that begins to and continues to grow, because some of those things that have been instilled inside of children are now being instilled in your children and will be instilled then into grandchildren, and it is going to continue to flow. I am so appreciative because I had lots of times with Joe and in the student ministry and working there, and Darlene and me being Satan. Some of you will understand that, some of you won't. And there, not as much time with Steve and Johnny. They were a little bit older, but still got to come to your church and do a presentation about parenting with you and Steve and I the other day. So the impact that family, and you have to realize this, the impact that your family has is greater than you. Because as you allow those things to grow and to foster and the love to happen, it is very impactful in everyone's lives. John did things uniquely. I can't imagine how Dale Nyman, his assistant, was able to find the things that he had put away. Just a few weeks ago, we were gifted a piece of furniture and went to get it and to see all that was there and what he had and the complexity of his mind that had to be, but it was very simple in his eyes. What I would like for you to take away from today is a man that loves his family, a man that loves God, a man that was able to devote himself to his first wife and then able to devote himself, Lorraine, to you, and his love that he had and the way that you were able to share. There were times when John would come in and church here is at 10 o'clock and church somewhere else was at 11 o'clock, and he would be able to be here for a moment of time and then go and be with you for that moment of time. The love of that and the sharing of that is impeccable. At this time, I'd like to invite Joe to come and to share some thoughts.
Where do you even start with this guy? I could stand up here for hours and not say, and I'm not going to. I realized that I had to narrow my focus, so I have. The first emotion that I felt when Dad passed away was gratitude. So that's going to be the focus. And I wrote him a thank you letter. Dear Dad, you've moved away from us to your new place. I decided to write you this letter, but I'm sorry to say I don't have your new address. God knows you'd never learn how to use email. I hope you like your new place and that you're resting peacefully after such a long road in this old one. I could only have imagined what this place would be like after you moved out. It's very different without you here. I think about calling you and asking you for advice or help or encouragement, but our phones don't work where you are now. Yes, Dad, you can finally stop answering that phone. I want to say thank you, Dad. Thank you for everything you've ever done for me. My first memories include you always being there, and that I was very special to you. You worked so hard and did everything you could for our family, and I know that none of us are born to perfect angels, and you would never claim to be one. But I do know this. You did your best. And your best is so much more than most people's best. Thank you for being so fun and funny and weird. So optimistic and so kind. Always trying to see the best in everybody. Kind's not a big enough word to describe what you are. Your example for helping other people is so truly inspiring, and so many of those people you have helped are with me in this room right now as I read this. Thank you for coaching me. You were the first great teacher that I ever had. And I've been able to use a lot of your teaching methods to help teach others. Thank you for always believing in me. You would always say, "You got greatness in you, hoorah!" You have no idea how much that means to me. Those words will always echo in my mind and in my heart. Thank you, Dad, for finding Lorraine after Mom moved to her new place. I honestly don't know how you pulled that off. As I've told you before, she and I adopted each other as mother and son, and I love her so much. She did so much for you when your body started to break down, and I'll always be so thankful for that. She's done more for me than I could ever describe in words. I'm so grateful that I could be with you for your last few months here. I needed to be there to watch the sunset on an amazing life of an amazing man. Just know that during that time, I wanted to give you more and help you more. But the reality of your failing health just made that impossible. Just know I gave you my best. Johnny, Steve, and Darlene have given you their best during that time we were losing you, and they still do to this day and will in the days to come. I cannot imagine having better siblings or better friends. I can never thank you and Mom enough for making such wonderful people. That I'm so proud to call my brothers and sister. You made your world a much better place for so many people, Dad. I'm so glad you're finally resting. Say hey to Mom for me and tell her that I miss her and love her. Love, hoorah, Joe.
Hey everyone, I'm the girl. When I was growing up, I would come out into school and Johnny and Steve would have already been there. You know, Johnny's the smart one, Steve's the jock. Oh, you're the girl, what do you do? I don't know. We figure it out as we go. I wanted to thank each one of you for being here, but I first want to thank God. I want to thank God's goodness and His grace because all good things come from Him. And let me tell you, my mama and daddy and our Mimi, they came from God because they are amazing. I want to thank Pastor Buren and Will and Miss Barbara and Dusty and all my Eagles Way family. You guys will always be in my heart. I always pray for you and think about you at 10:15 when I'm rocking out in Orlando at church. I think they're rocking out. They're rocking out just the same. So I really am so thankful to be here. I want to thank my Orlando family, which is where we live, my incredible husband, Matt, and my 3 beautiful children who are incredible. I could never live this life without you guys. So thank you. I want to thank our Mimi. After Mom passed, she took us in as her own. She's always called my children her grandchildren, and they didn't really know any different. So thank you so much for partying with my dad for 10 extra years because he loved it. He needed a new dance partner after his dance partner went to heaven, and Mimi, you stepped right in, and we thank you so much. You know, my daddy loved to sing and dance. Every time he'd see you, he'd have a song. There were a lot of different songs. He had a song for Joe. He had a song for Stevie. Sorry, Steve. He had a song for Johnny. You know, we all had the Y's at the end of our names when we were growing up. Somebody asked me one time during Father's Day, what's the one thing that you remember about your dad? And, you know, there's a lot. Like Joe said, he was, we'll just say, unique. He always sung to us. He always sung and brought joy in our lives. And I know that he's brought joy in all of your lives. Sometimes you're kind of like this kind of joy, or sometimes happy joy. But he, as you know, was such a force in this world. I mean, and you don't even see him comment. It's like stealth, ninja stealth force. You're like, oh my gosh, he has such wisdom. And you think this guy, you know, he would always say, I'd say, Dad, thank you so much for, I don't know, pick the 50,000 things he did for me during my life. And he'd say, oh, it's because of the good Lord. You know, people say that, I don't know, around here. They say it a lot. They say, oh, it's because of the good Lord. It's because of the good Lord. Well, and when I was growing up, I thought, well, that's just what people say. And it seemed almost something you just said at, you know, church and around town. But that is the truth. Because it is all for his glory, and my dad knew it. He didn't even know it. Because he knew that without God's strength, he could be nothing. And I hope all of you take that away too, because that's how I try to live my life like him. Because it's all because of him, which is what we have in our lives. My dad was my compass. I was the girl. He painted the world pink when I was born. I don't know if anybody's heard that story 50 times. He would, you know, make my brothers wear pink to church. And, you know, the resentment started very early. It's okay. They love me mostly now. My dad would say, oh, Darlene's my favorite. And they're like, we know. He's like, I'll pay for your therapy later. So soon after we moved him down to Orlando, he said, I want you to tell all your brothers, you're the boss. You tell them. You're the boss. So I was laughing. I was like, okay, Dad, I'll tell them. So I came home and I told my husband, I'm like, hey, babe, guess what? My dad said to tell my brothers that I'm the boss. He's like, they didn't already know it? So anyway. You know, through my life, there's so many things that I've learned from my amazing parents and our Mimi and my husband and my children and my brothers, is that really it boils down to loving God and loving other people. And I'm not sure if there's anyone that emulated that more than my dad. He was so selfless in his pursuit to take care of me, my brothers, and his grandbabies. He loved them so much. After my mom passed, it was not a great time for me. She was my best friend in the whole world. And she was such a light and joy. And I said, I don't know how I'm going to be a mom without my mom. How does that even work? And my dad was my compass. He led me. He's like, it's okay. You do this and you did this. Why don't you try this? And he always helped lead me and guide me, just like our Heavenly Father. My dad was my supporter, my encourager. He was my mentor. He was my counselor. He was loving no matter what. And yes, we went through a bunch of crazy stuff, but that's okay. Because he was always there. Like Joe said, I never remember a time he was always there. When we were younger, he used to get the Bible out in the mornings at breakfast, and we'd all be like, Johnny would have studied till like 2 a.m., and Mom would make him come down. Joe and I would be messing around with each other. But he always taught us that what was important, and that's God's word and prayer. He always taught us about the Bible. My mom taught us, just because a man says it doesn't mean God says it. Check it out for yourself. You know, if you know her, you know what I'm saying. We have a few sayings in my household. I just want to share these great stories because I know it's probably happened to you if you know him well. So we've turned his name into a verb at our house. So my kids will come to me and maybe they need something. I'm like, do you need me to John Herbert them for you? And what John Herbert them means is you call them, make sure you leave the cell number, because not all of us have phones that remember cell numbers, but he's going to leave his cell number. And if you don't call him back in 5 minutes, he's going to call your husband, your wife, your brother, your sister. Can you please have him call me back? Until he gets you to call him back. So again, you need that verb. If you need me to do it, I can John Herbert people for you too. I'm really good at it. I've really helped the skill. So I just want to leave you with this. I pray this over my church family here at Eagles Way. I pray this over my family here. I pray this over my brothers and their families and their children. So I just want to pray this over you now in honor of my dad, who always taught us that God's word is our foundation. It's from Colossians 3:12, and it says, as God's chosen people, holy and dearly loved, clothe yourself with compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. Bear with each other and forgive whatever grievances you have against each other. Forgive as the Lord forgave you. And over all these virtues put on love, which binds them together in perfect unity. Thank you all for being here. We really appreciate it.
Well, thanks everyone for coming, and I sincerely appreciate the relationship that you had and built with my dad. It filled a huge void that I left him when I left the house, so I really appreciate that. But my father, in his own way, was selfless. Evidence is the limited memorabilia I could scratch up for this event. And he went out of his way to try as hard as he could to make everyone feel special about themselves. And that's really the way he lived his life. So thank you again.
So now I know why Joe wanted to go first. You know, today's the 12th day of Christmas, January 6th. It's Epiphany. It's the day that the kings arrived from the east and the Gentiles met their Savior in the manger. I had my own epiphany this morning when I was getting ready. For the first time ever, every time I did the smallest thing, I would say, well, Dad taught you how to do that. I shaved, tied my tie. I'm wearing my tie because he taught me how to tie it, so I'm wearing it for him today. And it's funny, you know, he would have given me a hard time about not packing my belt. But then he would just said, just tie your tie a little longer and nobody will notice. Keep your jacket on. I want to thank my wife Felton for all the support she's shown us since Dad started to go down in late May. She's been a great partner for me with that. And my two children, Jacob and Jack, who were the light of his life. And all the cousins for all they did to make Dad's last days, happy ones. He really, really loved you guys. My brothers and my sister, can't ask for a better crew. It's taken all four of us to take care of Dad and all of his stuff. Mom always wanted to have more kids, and now I wish she had. Thanks, Dad. I want to thank Buren. I want to thank Eagles Way Church. I was telling Will and Buren earlier, it's always nice to have a place to go. And I'll let that just sink in for a second. It means a lot just to have a place you can go. I also want to recognize two very special ladies here today. My father's sister, Susan Moore, is here. She came with my cousin Andy, who's cousin by blood, and his wife, my cousin Angela, my favorite cousin. Sue was my dad's older sister. They got to visit with each other at Easter this year. They had an amazing life together. I want to thank Lorraine, Dad's amazing companion for the last decade. I'm happy that we've been able to have and maintain a great relationship. When Dad first started falling in May, I knew they had a good relationship, but I didn't really see until then how much they truly loved each other. And it was inspiring and encouraging. And if you know the great love story my father and my mother had, you can only stop to think and be thankful and wonder what it's like to be able to have two great loves in one life. So he was definitely blessed. A little bit about that. I don't know, he would tell stories all the time, but he was born in Washington, D.C., as you probably know. His great-grandfather was a U.S. senator. That's how the family got to D.C. Dad took his health seriously from a very young age. He stopped smoking when he was 12. He wanted to go play baseball at the boys' club, and a guy named Joe Branzel, later became a scout for the Texas Rangers, says, "Okay, Johnny, that's fine, but you got to put down the cigarettes first." He grew up in the rough streets of Georgetown, ended up through the boys' club. Boys' club really, he'll tell you, saved his life. He was dedicated to that organization his entire life, and I'm happy to see thriving boys and girls clubs here in Griffin, as well as the new one in Barnesville and Lamar. Grew up going to see Santa Claus at the Boys and Girls Club. His athletic ability led him to DeMatha High School in Hyattsville, Maryland, and is where he was with his not much older mentor, Morgan Wooten. Dad holds the records as high school for the most letters. He still holds the record. He has 11. Interesting story. I don't know if he ever told you this, but he and Morgan were actually credited with inventing taking the charge in basketball. That's back in the day when you shot free throws. If you took the charge, Dad took 10 charges one night in high school, made all 20 free throws. A scout from Georgia Tech was there that night, offered him a chance to come to Atlanta. Dad's like, "I had to go to the city." So that's how he got there. Interesting enough, I didn't know this too much later. Dad graduated second in his class in high school. He had a respectable career at Georgia Tech, playing for Coach Wack Hyder. He became good friends with Bill Curry because he roomed Coach Curry's best friend from high school. Coach used to put Dad on his shoulder so Dad could feel like it was what it was like for a 5'9" guy to dunk the basketball. Bill Curry also introduced my dad to Jesus. He did. He got out of Georgia Tech in the summer quarter of 1965. He completed his education and was in the Emory ROTC during Vietnam. He always said you might as well be an officer if you're going to go to war. During this time, he was a Theta Chi at Georgia Tech, and there was a young lady there named Diane Vaughn that would hang out with this other guy, one of his fraternity brothers. That guy went away that summer of 1965. During summer break, my dad stayed to graduate, and my mom and this guy decided they would date other people while I was gone, but he told her, "You can date anybody you want, just don't go out with John Herbert." How many of you know my mom? Yep. 3 weeks later, they were married. He was commissioned, and they were living in Southern California. That guy came back, didn't know what hit him. He proudly served for 2 years during the war. At the end of his service, he through the Georgia Tech placement office, got a job at Dundee Mills here in Griffin, and that's how he got here. He left Dundee to go sell insurance with a guy who's here. His name's Tom Barrett. Dad thought he was the smartest person in the world. He always thought he was the smartest person in the world. In 1973, he founded John Herbert Incorporated and went into the real estate business. At one time, he had 5 or 6 offices stretching from Fayetteville to Jackson. He decided he stopped wanting to manage people and he wanted to sell real estate. You notice a common theme that my siblings have: growing up and showing up. If you're a sports fan, you likely inherit your teams from your parents. And of course, Dad was really proud of his time at Georgia Tech and remained an active fan the rest of his life. He took me to my first Georgia Tech game, and I took him to his last. He grew up a Redskins fan, but quickly adopted the Falcons. Had season tickets from 1978 until they fired Lehman Bennett. He never got over that. Watching Tech on Saturday and the Falcons on Sunday is no easy task. Thanks, Dad. We do our best. In fact, I pass the gene down to my own too. But he was never happier than when he was coaching. He started, like Will was saying, he started coaching way before we were even old enough to play. I have rec, believe it or not, I do have rec gear that says Griffin Rec Department 1971. Still have. He coached thousands of kids through the decades, thousands. Some of them are here today. At everything he was known for, everything we'll say about him today, the greatest thing you could call him was coach. It's the top of the list. He rarely ever missed a game, an event, a performance, regardless of how far away it was. And he continued this even with my own children. Dad did have a deep spiritual life. We were longtime members at First Methodist Church. My dad, until the day he couldn't walk anymore, was a member of the men's Bible Sunday school class at First Methodist. Mr. Newton's here. Eventually, though, Mom and Dad left First Methodist Church and went to Griffin Community Church. Loved that church, poured everything they had into that church. Then there came a time when there was, I think I remember the story, there was a group of pastors that were all going to get together and form this new church called New Life Church. And they were all these pastors going to get together and they were going to coalesce around one spiritual leader. I'm not sure how they picked this leader, but I'm pretty sure they picked the best looking one that there was. And the lowest golf handicap as well. Dad had his own name for the church. He didn't call it Eagles Way. He didn't call it New Life. It was the Fast Break Church. It was always moving. Speaking of nickname, as Darlene said, Dad had a nickname for almost everybody. He either had a nickname for you or he'd walk up and sing a song. Worst part is Dad couldn't sing. He sure did try. It's interesting, since Dad fell at the end of May, I've been coming to Griffin almost every week to take care of his business and move things along and help out. I've learned as much about Dad since the end of May than I did probably for the rest of my life, and it was through many of you. He structured his business life around being with people. He had accounts from First Bank of Pike to First National Bank all the way out to Wells Fargo. Then there's Regions Bank and every United Bank, the south side, on this side of town. He would go every day, to check what he called his balances and get what he called his printouts. See, Dad didn't spend time online banking. He spent time in line banking. But it was just to see people. He wanted to be around people. There's not a teller in town that doesn't know him. Some of his best friends became people who bought property from him or rented property from him. They're here today. And when I started peeling back the layers of his business, I'm like, why are all these payments coming in at weird times of the month? You know, what happened to the first? I came to learn that he had people pay him on different days of the month, so he had somewhere to go and somebody to see. I think Patrick Miller pays 5 days a month, and every time Dad would go get a check, it was an hour visit. He just loved people. That's why he went to 3 or 4 churches, like you guys are saying. More days of picking up checks, just more time he could spend to you. It's no different if you go around the county. I've been to the deed room lately, the tax office, the property tax office, and of course the probate court. Everybody, oh, your dad was in here all the time. He truly loved all of you. You enriched his life and you gave him purpose. I've thought a lot. I've had some time to think about what I would say today. And I just can't figure out what to say next. I don't know how to end that story. What do I say? I think the end of that story is here in this room. We will all tell the end of Dad's story as we live out our lives. We tell his story when we love each other, when we respect each other, when we're kind to one another. We'll show up when it's time to show up. We'll sing silly songs. And we might throw in a few nicknames. And so the story continues.
give it a moment. I know I'm gonna step down, so I don't want feedback, so. Lorraine, come speak.
Hello. I've never done this before, and I'm sure this will be the last time I do this, but John was very special. And I used to say to him, let me put my eyes on so I can read my notes. I would ask him, how is it a man could be both dashingly handsome and devilishly cute all at the same time? And he would look at me and say, you need to get your eyes checked. But he was that to me. Those eyes, that twinkle he had, and that grin that was so winsome, That was my John, Papa John. Tom Barrett was mentioned, and Tom and Barbara Barrett, two of the nicest people you'll ever know. Tom told me when John and I married, he said, Lorraine, he said, you'll never have a dull moment again in your life. Tom was right. I want to give you just one example of this never having a dull moment. Nancy Smith, who is a dear friend and someone who helped John and me keep the house in order. She tried to keep John and me straight and orderly. And with John Herbert, that was quite a challenge sometimes because John was not a person of now I won't say he wasn't orderly. His paperwork was when he went somewhere to write up a contract or something, everything was perfect. I mean, he knew all the steps and everything was done just as it was supposed to be done. And if anything wasn't right, he would catch it. But at home, there was a clutter, right? I see Darlene nodding. Apparently, this wasn't anything new when he came to, when we got together. However, anyway, I finally made downstairs off limits and said, it's just going to be upstairs, John. You can't spread out all over the dining room table anymore. He said, you don't understand. I've got taxes to do. I said, but taxes come once a year. I finally realized that with his business, he had taxes, quarterly, but he worked on them every day, it seemed. And so there was the clutter. But anyway, it was okay. He finally brought everything upstairs, and that was good. He came home at lunch one day, and he walked through the room where Nancy and I were, and we both noticed it. And I said, oh, darling, you're going to have to change your pants before you go back out. You've got a hole in the seat of your pants. He just kept walking. He never lost stride. And he says, oh, those women, they just grab on and they won't let go. That's my John. And we got him to change his pants before he left, but some miracle or something. But that was John. He kept me laughing right up until he was gone, and I miss him so much. When the children would come and it was time to go, everyone gathered at the back door, and Papa John would start with his usual ritual. Please don't go. Oh, please don't go. If I get down on my knees and beg, will you stay? please stay, don't go. And the kids would start laughing. Oh, Papa John, Papa John. Well, oh, he just wouldn't stop. It was all over and over again every time they left. And if, please don't go, please stay. And of course, they loved it, but it was when he was taking that last breath on October 9th, I wanted to say, don't go, please stay. But John Herbert was ready to go, and he had been ready because he was always prepared. So I was able to say to him, it's okay. You go. You go with God. On the wings of angels, you go. When we married and Buren, it was important to John that we have communion. And so Buren held communion with us. And I didn't bring the program from I meant to, so that I could read this to you. I'm going to try and remember it. We had it's an old Gaelic poem, an Irish poem that we had sung because it's been set to music. And as we walked down the aisle, nearly skipping, holding hands, it was sung. And the Irish prayer goes sort of like this. May the road rise up to meet you. May the sun shine warmly on your face. May the rain fall softly on your field. And until we meet again, may God hold you in the palm of his hand. My babies came, my grandchildren, and Darlene, and family, and Joe, and now everybody's here, so I'm happy. But the baby showed up yesterday. Yeah, and I had not been sleeping well at night, but last night I slept, and I dreamed of John, and I dreamed, and I said, darling, what are you doing? This is true. This is what I dreamed. And he looked at me and he said, I'm trying to learn to play this harp. He's still bringing me joy. He has brought me more joy, and I'm so thankful that I've had him in my life. And the greatest gift he gave me was his family that I love so much, all of you. And I will love you for all the rest of my life. Thank you. Thank you all for being with us today.
I promise I will not be long. There's not a whole lot I can say to top what has already been said about such a gracious, wonderful man. But this is, in the last 2 weeks and 2 days, this is the third service I've done of 3 outstanding members. Billy Woodward, who was here for almost 40 years, Don Chapman, who was here over 25, and now John Herbert, who was here about 40 years. And to say it's easy, it's not. But grief is not a disorder. It's not a disease or sign of weakness. It's an emotional, physical, and spiritual necessity, the price you pay for love. It's like the ocean. It comes on waves, ebbing and flowing. Sometimes the water's calm, sometimes it's overwhelming, and all we can do is swim. Grief never ends, but it changes. is a passage, not a place to stay. Grief is not a sign of weakness, it's the price of love. Years ago, I was in the post office, and I'll never forget, God speaking to me and said, if you accept the people nobody wants, I'll give you the people everybody wants. And I made a wishful thought one day. I met Billy Woodward at a meeting, and I said, I wish I had people like that in our church. And I remember that statement. And so because of that, God gave us a few hundred people like John Herbert and Diane Herbert, and people that everybody wants. Somebody said to me one time, Bearden, which side of the fence am I on? The people nobody wants or the people everybody wants? And I just, being the gracious, loving pastor I am, I said, you have to determine that yourself. But there's a statement that's made in psychological and spiritual circles that says, be the best version of yourself that you can be. John Herbert did that. But the first thing you got to do to be the best version of yourself you can be is be yourself. We all know John Herbert was himself. Nobody could rock 1960 clothes like John Herbert. Nobody can rock tying a sweater around your neck like John Herbert could. I see him coming across the parking lot, and it's like a flower pot coming up here. I mean, all kinds of colors. You just never knew what he was going to wear. But he was himself, and he was okay in that. And that teaches us all. We need to take lesson from that. Just be you. That's what he would say to us today. Be you. Be who God called you to be. I was preaching one day about 20 years ago, and I happened to mention my first name was John, and he didn't know that. And so in the foyer, he met me out there, and he said, let me get this straight. Your name's John, and you go by Buren? I said, yeah. He said, that don't make any sense. And I said, you know it doesn't. And I said, John, I'm going to start going by John. And I actually did. All my business dealings was John, and I got a few people call me John. And so I was reading this book on saints, 365 days a year, each saint. And I was reading that book, and it said that some people, ordained saints, did great, mighty things. Some just did one thing. And so I thought to myself, I've done a lot more than that, so I just ordained myself a saint. I call myself St. John. And so I said that one day, and John came up to me and said, okay, if you're St. John 1, I'm St. John 2. I said, all's good with me. And but John he'd come up with this big old thick billfold. Anybody ever seen that billfold? Gosh, but he knew everything in that billfold. But he'd say, I got a check in here for you. I know I do. And he would fumble through all those papers, and he'd pull out a check, hand it to me. And down in the corner of that check every time, there'd be this note, so much of it to the alms. So much of it to people who have a need. That was John. That was John. It was his heart. He was selfless. He did want to take care. And just as so many other people, his fingerprints are all over this campus, all over this place. His giving for 40-something, almost 40 years of faithful, faithful, faithful. I love what he said to you, Darlene. Dusty told me that the one thing he loved about me